I would like to make this video today just as a quick follow-up to all the people in my videos who are saying, oh, if your engine's burning oil, it's just your PCV valve. And I'm going to explain to you today in a very simple manner as to why that is not the case. Now, yes, in some cases, a bad PCV valve can cause oil burning, which I'll get to in a second, but 9 times out of 10, if your engine has major oil burning problems, it will not be your PCV valve. Now this is just a basic engine, and today I'm showing you just a V-shaped design, so just, imagine it's a V6 or a V8, right? This is our main engine block on the bottom with the crank, and then we got our V design for the pistons going each way. So these are our two heads right here, and so basically these are the valves housed on top right here. These are where our valve covers are going to be. And on top of the valve covers, we're going to have two little lines come out, and they're going to be the PCV valves. And the PCV valves are going to attach into our air intake, which is going to go into our air intake plenum on the top of the engine. Now, I didn't do a perfect job of drawing this. Obviously, there's going to be like a mass airflow sensor, and then there's going to be a throttle body before the air actually gets into the engine. But for the purposes of today, I'm just showing you the filtered air comes in. The PCV valve is connected to the filtered air for the purpose of keeping vacuum and for the purpose of venting the air back into the air intake, because there is a actual purpose of the PCV valve, believe it or not. Most people don't really understand what it's for, and it's very simple. So why is this set up like this? Why are these valves going back into the air intake? Well, basically the purpose of it is when moisture builds up in your engine, the moisture needs to get out of the engine oil. I think it would be very obvious to understand why you wouldn't want moisture in your engine oil. I mean, obviously moisture causes metal parts to corrode and rust and such, and that is exactly the opposite of what you want in an engine. Plus, if you get water inside of an engine, you can risk hydro locking. So that is the purpose of why these PCV valves exist, because based on the vacuum, they create the positive crankcase ventilation. So the ventilation, basically the valves venting out the excess moisture and air they have built up inside of them. The moisture comes out and goes into the air intake and then goes into the intake to get burned through the engine, versus staying inside of the engine and moisture building up and it breaking down your engine slowly over time. That's basically the purpose of the PCV valve. Now, where the whole common misconception about the PCV valve being the only thing to cause oil burning comes in is PCV valves will cause oil to burn when the valve is stuck open. So, the valve is controlled basically by pressure, right? So it's going to either open or close based on how much pressure is built up in these valve heads right here. And if the mechanism breaks, then it'll just be stuck open all the time, and it'll just constantly be sucking out pressure. And so in that case, it could be sucking out oil that could be in the heads, and then that oil can be sucked into the intake and then burned. And then generally that'll carbon up your throttle body and such, and just eventually lead to oil burning. Now, at that point, bad PCV valve wouldn't cause oil burning to be that catastrophic. It wouldn't be really, really bad, which is why I'm saying to you guys, like, this is not the main reason why it would be happening. This could be a reason. If you have a very, very small oil burn and you don't see oil leaking anywhere, you don't really see it burning in your tailpipe, you can't find carbon in your tailpipe, a good thing to do is check your throttle body and see if there's a lot of carbon built up in there, because a lot of times carbon will build up in the throttle body because, believe it or not, throttle bodies get really hot because they're attached to the head of the engine. A lot of them are actually water cooled. And so if this oil is coming in there and it's really hot, then it's going to carbon up and gunk up on the throttle bodies, which can cause throttle bodies to get dirty over time. Now, this happens to any car as they get old, like the throttle body is getting dirty, but if it happens a lot, it could be because of a bad PCV valve. But what I'm trying to explain to you guys today is PCV valve is a very simple system just to remove moisture from the engine. And in the case that that valve breaks, yes, it can cause some oil burning because it can suck oil out of the engine. What we really need to consider as to why modern engines are really burning more oil is a few actually really important points about modern engines and how they're manufactured. There are looser tolerances throughout the engine. There is more power and performance packed into smaller displacement engines in the modern world because of G.D.I and turbocharging and such, or also just the way they found to make more power out of smaller designs. These looser tolerances allow for higher oil pressures and such to move through the engine to handle the higher performance. If you know anything about building performance vehicles, you need looser tolerances, because if you have really tight tolerances with really high power and compression and such, you're going to cause things to burst and things to explode and break because it can't handle all the stress. Therefore, you need looser tolerances for less pressure throughout the engine, needing to be higher oil pressure and such. So looser tolerances are one of the reasons why. Looser tolerances meaning there's more clearance between things like piston rings and stuff like that. So like say this is the wall of the piston, and then this is the piston moving up and down. There's less space between the wall and that piston. Now, I mean, these tolerances are thousandths of an inch to begin with, but I mean, there could be less or bigger, and just that little bit can let oil slip by to get burned. There's also overall weaker components when we're talking about something like piston rings and stuff like that. They're made of lighter weight materials, lighter weight metals, and because they're made of lighter weight materials, they're obviously not as strong and they won't last as long over time, and they'll wear out faster or they'll get clogged faster in the case of piston rings and stuff like that. The reason why they use lighter weight is not just like some stupid reason. Like, yes, they can save manufacturing costs on using lighter parts and stuff like that, but the main reason for it is better economy, because when you have less friction, again, talking about something like, you know, the cylinder wall and then the cylinder moving up and down with it, when there's less friction between those two surfaces, it can get better economy because the engine doesn't have to work as hard to keep moving the pistons up and down. It's just general physics, you know, like less energy. So that's another reason why. So yes, you can get better gas mileage, but at the cost of you possibly burning oil. And then on top of like these two manufacturing things right here, then you're talking about turbocharging, which creates very high pressure in the engine. You're creating extremely high compression when you turbocharge. And then you also got to think about G.D.I, which is also creating extremely high pressure, because those fuel injectors are usually pulsing in roughly 20,000 psi, at least usually. I mean, bare minimum, it's usually 2,000 psi, but 2,000 psi is on the low end. A lot of modern cars have fuel injectors injecting fuel at up to 20,000 pounds per square inch, which is absolutely insane. Makes sense for something like a diesel application where its ignition system is basically based off of compression, but like for gasoline engines, it's just insane how much pressure it goes in. Now, there are systems that have been implemented by companies like Toyota who are trying to implement new technologies to fix this, such as multi-port injection, where we have injectors getting through port injection, so like in the air intake, and then when, you know, when the intake valve pulls air in, the fuel goes in with it to clean the intake valve. And then there's G.D.I going directly into the cylinder head underneath to make that better atomization of fuel, create that higher pressure, create that higher compression, and create more power in that stroke. That's exactly what G.D.I is doing, but companies like Toyota, who have that multi-port injection system where it still has a normal port injected system where there's gasoline moving through the intake valve, allows the intake valve to be cleaned and not carbon up. This is not fake. I don't know why some people think that this is just made up and that we're just like hating on companies when we say like, oh, engines carbon up because of G.D.I. It's not fake. If you don't have port injection to clean those intake valves, they're going to carbon up. It's guaranteed. Lots of Volkswagens have this problem. They're one of the most common ones, is they get carboned up, and then once they get carboned up, you got to take the whole engine apart and take the head off just so you can get it walnut blasted so that you can clean out all that carbon that builds up, because otherwise your engine won't run well. And then we just have overall poor quality control, which whatever, it is what it is. You can say whatever you want about any company, but overall, you know that manufacturing is just getting cheaper and cheaper because the companies are just trying to make as much money as they can, which from their perspective, you know, it's a business model, trying to make as much money as they can, sell as many products as they can, make them work, make them functional. You also got to think about how most cars are built to be leased now and not to be owned for a long time, because a lot more people are leasing cars instead of owning them, because they want to get the newest thing. So that's another thing too. Cars are really only meant to last the lease period now and not really to be lasting years and years and years. So, you know, that's a little bit of a personal opinion, but you know, these are the reasons why. And I just hope that this little bit of extra insight might have helped anybody understand why engines burn oil, especially these modern ones. I will say personally, my truck burned oil for the longest time, and my truck burned oil because of a very simple reason. I had a seal on my oil pickup tube, so The pickup tube's in the bottom of the engine pan. Then there's a tube that goes into the oil pump, you know, right where the crank is on the bottom of the engine. And there's a little seal that goes in where that pickup tube goes into the oil pump. And my seal went bad and I was having a low oil pressure problem in my truck. And lo and behold, when I fixed that seal, oil must have been escaping out of it, and that's where oil was burning. And after I fixed that seal, my truck no longer burns oil between oil changes. So, you know, it could just be something as simple as that. It doesn't have to be G.D.I. I'm not trying to hate on companies that use it. I'm just trying to say these are the reasons why it happens, and I hope that this insight may help you guys. Thanks.